Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe here with me, my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we have for you all another Beyond the Black River video. This is hopefully going to be the penultimate episode for this short series on this short story. Chapter 2, we find out that the fort that Conan drags Balthus to is called Fort Tusculum. It's on the eastern side of the Black River. We discover that the currency of Aquilonia is called Lunus. I would propose that they're probably minted bronze, silver, and gold coins, probably in the mold of the sestertii and denarii, but they're called Lunus in that there's probably the moon stamped onto these things, along with, on the other side, the reverse side, the ruler's face. Would be my fan theory, and if I was at all a comic book artist, I'd probably portray them this way. I don't know if any comic book has ever portrayed this story with this, but my notion is just that this would be the most logical conclusion to reach when it comes to the currency. You'd probably have something like Rex, for example, Numidities Rex Aquilonia or something. Now, if it was Latin, but it would not be Latin. It'd be a precursoral language to probably the Hittite language, which itself was a Indo-European language that was something of a predecessor alongside Greek to an extent, and Etruscan to Latin. So Nishite, that's the language's name. And Nishite bears a lot of similarities to German, English. Nishite's a very interesting language. I would theorize that the Aquilonian language is a Proto-Celtic language, but also which is itself an Indo-European language, but also a Proto-Nishite tongue. So you have the Lunus, which would probably have some sort of slogan of sorts on one side, probably the ruler side, where you're going to have the title. Then on the other side, you have the ruler's personal slogan, which a lot of rulers did that, and you'd have, for example, British pounds, which were kind of like this, and Roman coins were like this, and these Lunus probably have this characteristic. So it would suggest that Aquilonia reveres the moon. Is a fascinating side of things, as the main religion is Mitra, but it suggests that one of the symbols of Mitra is probably the moon itself. Mitra is almost a solar deitic figure, so I just wonder if maybe the moon and the sun are both associated with Mitra in some capacity. But on the other hand, if you look at it from a polytheistic point of view, this would suggest that there's another god alongside Mitra who's worshipped, a bit of an Asherah to the Yahweh, or maybe something akin to Selene to Helios. The possibility that, like the Romans, they are a multi-religious people, or that within the religion there's more than one god. How we learn what the currency is called is between two guards who go, "Pay up, he survived," which we would later see these characters reincarnated in a DreamWorks animated film about Sinbad. We're introduced to the fact that they're shocked that Tiberius was killed and had his head chopped off. Who could blame them? It's a pretty gruesome thing that Zogar Sag has done. We get introduced to the name Valinus, which, if you'll recall from Hour of the Dragon, is the name of the guy who is selected to pretend to be Conan during the battle of those hills where Conan is believed to have been killed, where Zaltotun takes a chunk of the mountain and chucks it at an army, which is a pretty impressive feat. Howard is reusing names. He wrote Beyond the Black River, obviously before Hour of the Dragon. So you have here a reusage of a name. So he's doing something very similar that Tolkien does. The governor, Valinus, feared that Conan might have been lost in the wilderness. Balthus apparently comes from a place called Tauren, which Tauren would later be reused in the Suikoden fantasy series as Tauron for a name for a region which would yield a republic, which is pretty much the equivalent of an almost Roman-styled society, which is the greatest of that world and the most powerful. And it brings Enlightenment values and ideas to that world. The army that conquered Conajohara, which sounds really like a native region, has retired from the area. Zogar has poisoned some of the local water that the fort needs to survive, which is a rather cruel thing to do. The men of the fort are fearful of Zogar and of him unleashing the Black Plague upon them. Yeah, I'd be afraid of that too. Conan suggests that they try to strike down Zogar. Valinus pretty much goes okay, and Conan tells him, but I want to take only about 12 guys with me. Squad of sorts. to which Valinus agrees to support him. Balthus begs to come along and is accepted, with the team setting off for Gwaihela. Chapter 3 is basically just, this is observations about his peers and him kind of trying to understand them in a way, but also admiring them. Now, many of the men selected by Conan are men who have regressed back to barbarism or were barbarian mercenaries, as Conan selected his men with care for how tough and hardy they are. That said, Balthus feels honored that he was selected to join them as well. The thing, though, is that at the end, he ends up running across one of the wild beasts that have been tainted by Zogar and ends up burying his knife into him. Apparently, he tends to keep a hidden knife in his boot, which is pretty cool. Which, this is probably the inspiration for that old trope in fantasy fiction where there's always someone with a knife in his boot. Kitiara, Ufmatar, and Dragonlance has that. I've seen countless others, rogues and scoundrels who do that in fantasy, so that's a tired trope. But Howard can get away with these things because he's the original. He's the OG. Now I see where people were saying this is basically a Western, because you have the head of the fort who addresses the sheriff and tells him, I don't want to lose any more men. Listen, sir, I'll just take about a dozen men with me. We'll shoot up them barbarians or them Mexicans. We'll scare them the heck out of here. That'll be that. And we'll take out their chieftain, who's the cause of all these problems. So the sheriff then goes off and does just that. Really, Conan is the sheriff in this story, and Valinus is the local governor or guy hung out to dry from the capital or something. It is such a trope-drenched chapter 2 I mean, that now I get it. Oh yeah, this is a Western disguised as a mythological story. And I don't mind that to an extent, but I still prefer the more mythological stuff like Phoenix on the Sword, Red Nails, Dusk, the story of the Black Citadel, and others like that over this. Not that I don't like this story. I'm enjoying it so far, but I'm not very familiar with Westerns. So to me, it's okay. This is actually the kind of short story I think our dad would have loved because he was obsessed with Westerns. I don't fully get the attraction, but I guess for me, I view them as a very American thing. And the Wild West, while I do think it has its appeal historically, honestly, I think in some ways the Wild West was a more attractive time to live in than today in some ways. On the other hand, the mythological aspect of it, that's purely American, I guess I just very American thing, and it's for those who are more hungry for America in a way, or for Texas or something. I prefer mythology, I prefer fantasy, I prefer history of a different sort, like knights and Romans and whatnot, or ancient Egypt or Japan. And for me, so maybe if I watch a few Westerns as Dan suggested, maybe I'll get it.
I know that the Western was more popular in North America and even Europe primarily. Western Europe a bit more.
The sheriff and the local governor. And I guess I don't get why we need to see Conan in the role of a sheriff. And
it's amusing imagining him in a cowboy hat, but
I don't see how it's amusing. I'm not saying I don't want it. I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't understand. I like cowboy hats as much as the next guy. They're great hats, but I don't get it.
It feels like a fish out of water.
I feel like I'm a fish out of water right now. I'm completely out of my element, and I'm completely confused about... All right, partners, if you enjoyed this video, then do feel free to take a swipe at the like and subscribe buttons as though you were Sheriff Conan himself taking down his enemies.